still here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is Turnarounds and Endings. And I recently did a ZZ Top Chordplay episode, and in that lesson I mentioned I was going to create a turnaround-focused chordplay episode. And I had a bunch of feedback and requests and messages about that, and I was confused. I thought I was the only one that really liked turnarounds, but apparently a lot of viewers out there want to learn more or maybe dive into this really interesting kind of musical anomaly, and you'll find it in early blues and jazz and big band music, and you'll find it in rock and country and some different styles of music. And it's interesting, and in blues you definitely find like in a 12-bar blues format, 10 bars of rhythm and chords, and then the 11th and 12th bar in a blues is that magical moment where a lot of musicians kind of whip out interesting turnarounds and these kind of complex, tonalities and harmonies in a turnaround. And here's an image giving you a heads up as far as 10 influential, kind of pioneering blues musicians that definitely kind of paved the way and kicked that turnaround door open. And they're, just complete blues legends. Okay, to get started, we're just going to start with a very basic turnaround, and we're really just going to play a series of fretted notes on the G string and also the high E string open. And keep in mind, this is, technically the end of a blues progression. So we're basically starting in E, and then you'll hear this kind of transition through the chords. And then we're going to finish with B7, which would be the 5 chord in the key of E, right? So the first one, we're really just going to move from B to B flat, A, and then we're going to finish on G sharp. And we're going to also play the high E string open. And I'm going to hybrid pick through this, something like this. And right at the end, there's that B7 chord. So one more time. It's kind of pulling through those chords and leading you back to that 5 chord before starting the whole thing over in E. So right there, that's kind of E5, and then an E flat 5, E sus4, and then just finish there with E. And then the last chord, of course, is that B7. Bunch of things. We can start to fill out those single notes and start playing little partial chords. So let's try it like this now. And that's going to get us a little bit closer to a traditional turnaround. In that first shape, that's an E7. And then just move that down a half step, and then you're playing an E6 flat 5. And then right there, that's an E augmented sus4. And then the E major, and then just walk into that B7 again. And you've probably heard that somewhere, maybe Clapton or Stevie Ray Vaughan or some of the classic blues musicians I had on that image earlier. But there we're kind of arpeggiating through those chords. And we could also strum that. Kind of hybrid pick it, right? And then we can kind of further expand that idea. And so instead of playing single notes and partial chords, now let's play this, which that's going to function as E7 once again. Move that down a half step, and then you have an E diminished 7, and then E augmented sus2 sus4, and then end with that E. Something like that. You could strum it. Hybrid pick. There's a million ways you could kind of play around with that. But that's going to kind of get your feet wet and at least your toe in the pool of blues turnarounds. We could also scrap the middle note there on the B string and just focus on the G and the high E. Something like that. It's kind of more of a simplified turnaround, but that's really common. And then we could also kind of augment what we're doing there and do something a little fancier like this. That in, songs from James Taylor and a whole bunch of places, not just blues. And I really like that because we're modifying, what we were playing earlier. Pretty cool. Now the next step, we can actually take what we were doing on the G, B, and high E strings and start incorporating lower strings and lower notes. And we could start with something like this, which that's going to function as E7. And then just move that down a half step and you'll technically be playing E6. Or an E6 flat 5. And then move it down again. And then you're playing E augmented sus4. Move it down another half step and you're back at E. Something like that. Traditional, pretty common sound. Now we could also piece through that and you could, kind of pluck the first two notes together and then separate the other strings. Something like that. And it's pretty common to hear that hammer on from the G to G sharp, when you finally reach E there at the end. Sound, and you can expand that out even further. Let's do something like this, and we're going to actually grab a B up on the high E string, and then all the way down we're going to extend and grab those higher notes. Something like that. Definitely dress that up a lot of different ways and kind of play around with that idea. Now what we can do is we can kind of transfer what we just played in a lower position and we can move it really high on the fretboard, and you'll definitely hear lots of guitarists doing this too. And the first one, we're going to keep all of this in the key of E, but the first one looks like this. And there you can see we're kind of implying, E7, E6 flat 5, E augmented sus4, and then just finish there with E. And right there you could slide, from C7 to B7 at the end. Now you can go the other way, you could ascend too. There's a ton of different things you could try there. We could also experiment with some contrary motion and kind of have notes moving in opposite directions, like this. That one's a little trickier, and I kind of screwed it up, I think. Something like that. And that's a cool just variation of what we were doing in lower positions, but hiked, higher on the fretboard. You will find turnarounds, obviously, at the end of blues songs and of music. And sometimes it's just the end of a 12-bar blues progression or the cycle of a 12-bar blues. But then some songs actually begin with a turnaround. That's the first thing you hear is, the turnaround being played. And those higher turnarounds we just looked at, it is kind of reminiscent of a very famous ending. And this is known as a Count Basie ending. And it looks and sounds something like this. Very famous ending. And you can hear that in lots of different music, but it came from Count Basie, a big band pioneer and legend. And another big band pioneer, Duke Ellington, he has his own ending. And this is the Duke Ellington ending. And that's actually what I started this lesson or this video with, which was this. And there you can see it's all built around single notes. And then ends with that real jazzy E6-9 flat 5. And you can hear tons of variations of the Duke Ellington ending out there. it's common in jazz. And there I'm ending with an E13 at the end. Something like that. And you can even catch this in the movie Crossroads, and you know, the famous head-cutting duel between, you know, Ralph Macchio and Steve Vai, which was actually Ry Cooder and Steve Vai, and Ralph Macchio just, you know, obviously performed on camera, but that was Ry Cooder, you know, playing all the slide and the blues licks and stuff. And Vai, of course, was doing the shredding and the crazy stuff, the Paganini and whatnot. But in that film, you know, before the head-cutting duel, but after the character says, you know, Jack Butler's gonna like you, it cuts to, you know, the stage, and there's Vai, you know, shredding and rocking out. And at the end of that moment, before the duel, you'll hear Vai do a variation of the Duke Ellington ending, something like this. You know, and it's just a slight variation. It's all on one string, too. Which is interesting to hear that variation. Something like that. There are a ton of famous endings out there like these. You know, you've probably heard this one somewhere. You know, very famous, and it's kind of funny or silly just to throw that at the end of a song. And the last one I'm going to give you here, this actually I picked up from Buckethead, but it does remind me of Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed. Kind of has a country or bluegrass, you know, kind of sound. And it's this open string kind of cascade ending. Something like this. Really cool lick. Or ending, I guess. But there you can see we're doing this. And there. Really interesting to kind of roll into that high E string open. And it ends with that harmonic on the top. Last suggestion I'm going to share here with you is, you know, all of these examples were in the key of E, and they revolved around E and E7. And once you've kind of mastered some of these ideas, I highly recommend, you know, move it to other keys. And, you know, you could take, you know, any of the turnarounds we looked at. But just an example of what I mean, you could do, you know, this one. You know, that's in the key of E. You could hike that up and do it in the key of A. Mix it up, and you could take some of those turnarounds and do you know, kind of move it into A right there. Really cool, and definitely worth exploring, you know, moving it to other keys, and you never know what you might uncover or kind of tap into just experimenting and kind of playing around like that. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chord Play with turnarounds and endings. And I just wanted to kind of, you know, put this out there because I did notice some excitement and some messages, and it sounded like there were quite a few of you that were interested in diving into turnarounds. And there's hundreds of these, if not thousands of them, you know, floating around out there. And it's just a matter of noticing them and then kind of breaking down, you know, what was played. And obviously in blues, they're usually pretty simple. And then when you start drifting over into jazz and some of the different, you know, versions and variations and subgenres of jazz, it can get very complicated. So I didn't really get too complex with some of the jazzier endings and turnarounds. I just wanted to kind of keep it pretty straightforward. But keep in mind, there's a ton of them hiding out there. It's just a matter of kind of digging them up and finding them and kind of breaking them, you know, breaking them down. So really exciting stuff, you know, and you can find it in all sorts of different styles of music. And it's just interesting when you hear one, especially if it's one you haven't heard before or played before, and it's like, hey, I don't think I know that one. And then you grab your guitar and try to figure it out. It's pretty cool, and it's challenging, but it also kind of twists your ear a little bit and kind of draws attention to what you're playing. And definitely if you want to inject, you know, your music with some blues and jazz and some of these, you know, kind of big band elements and things, it really kind of spices everything up. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.